Awesome. Hey, welcome back to the Low Stick podcast. My name is Eric Detman, and I'm here with my co-host, Jason Retz. And we're actually super pumped to talk today because it's another episode where we got some feedback from our listeners, and they wanted us to talk about something specific. So we're going to do that. So Thor Espenson, head coach at Ida B. Wells High School here in Portland, Oregon, one of our rivals, asked us to talk a little bit about how we address our team. So that's from a pre-practice standpoint. That could be a pre-meet standpoint. That can be pre-workout standpoint. There's a lot of different directions we can go in, but we're super excited to talk about that and just talk about, how we're intentional with certain things or how we address certain things. Super excited to talk about that. So Jason, let me kind of let you get started. We're looking at our practice schedule: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Are there certain days where you're addressing certain things? Is it, kind of go with the flow of what you feel like the kids needs? Like, what's your thought process when it comes to addressing your kids before practice?
Yeah, I think this is a super important topic that was brought to us because there's a lot of different ways to do this. I think we mentioned during cross country season, we go to the classroom once a week, early in the week, to kind of talk about the week. But because of the size of your track team, we don't do that as often. When we sit down with our track team, obviously we've got all event groups and we've got guys and girls together. So addressing our groups, we kind of prioritize some of our days, talk about some of the details of what's happening when, but then our coaches for those groups are really in charge of controlling the dialogue for what needs to be accomplished for the week. So I'll stand up in front and tell everybody the bus times and what the week looks like. But then from there, we'll break down into smaller groups and really address the things we need to take care of. So, for example, our throws group, we may go out, or they may go out and talk about what's going to happen, what the week's going to look like, where the point of emphasis is going to be. Our sprinters are with our sprint coach. Maybe they're splitting into smaller groups based on what the week looks like, if there's a JV meet or there's a varsity meet. But we really try to give the control of the dialogue for that group to that coach. I think that's super important because that gives them a voice that they can always listen to. So for us, with the distance kids, and I also have the jumpers, with the jumpers, we talk about early in the week, the days we want them and what we're trying to accomplish for the week. And the distance runners, we do a similar thing. We get together and we talk about prioritizing the week, what it's going to look like. I even turn into the weatherman and talk about what the weather's going to look like here. And normally it's been wind the last several weeks. So we really try to set the kids up for success early in the week to get them going towards whatever is going to be accomplished for the week. How do you start yours?
I would say it's similar-ish. We use Monday as a day to kind of give an update of like what we want that week to look like. Not necessarily from a training perspective, but just, what's going to be happening. So maybe we're doing a team dinner. We're letting kids know about that. Maybe we've got a meet on Friday or Saturday. We're going to talk about specifics around that. But we really try to utilize that Monday meeting to make sure that kids are super aware of what that week's going to look like. Because we don't want things to creep up on them. We don't want them to come back and be like, wait, I didn't know about this. So we try to utilize Monday as that day. As we progress, it really shifts on a per day or even per week basis. And sometimes, here's an example. In this past cross country season, I was about to go for a run, and I felt really, really terrible at the start of my run, and I knew that I wanted to do kind of a mini workout in the middle of it. So I went for the run. I started. I'm like, I'm just gonna try, and if it doesn't go the way I want, so be it. That's fine. But what ended up happening is I had a really great workout, like one of the better ones I've had in a long time. So I talked about that with my kids of like, you just have to give yourself a chance. And as I was running, I was thinking to myself, like, I'm going to utilize this day as an opportunity to talk to our kids. Like, give yourself a chance. You never know how you're going to feel. But if you go in with a defeated mindset and just say, like, this is going to be terrible, or this is going to be this, or whatever, like, you're probably not going to have the day that you want. And then I go into like my workout list that I've created and I write, April 23rd, and I'll write what I talked about to the kids. And that I do that. So it reminds me of like how to, or something to address the kids or talk about in the future. So I don't forget about that moment. So that's one thing that I like to really do is like pull onto my key experiences and provide, that storytelling to the kids so they know they're not the only one.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, especially in our sport. You can draw something from almost anything you watch or you see throughout the course of the day to help those people out.
Right. Exactly. And our kids, like I've heard them respond to it or talk about um, that moment or that, that meeting that I led. Like, hey, that was really helpful. Like I thought about that in my workout today, or I thought about that in my race today. So really, trying to be like influential, I guess, in some capacity.
Absolutely.
So when you think to your meetings, like, are there any specific things that or your kids know, like this is coming, like you address it every day or you do it every day? Like what are some of those things?
So if you were to come to our practice, you would see us circled up and in meeting. We'd be talking specifically about what the workout was going to be, what the objectives were. So let's take, for example, yesterday. Yesterday was our long run day. We had a beautiful day off school. We went out to a state park. We circled up and we talked. Not only do we talk about what the day is, but where it is in the structure of our year. So for us, yesterday was really our last big long run day of our season. We are rolling up on a month to go, and the physiological change that we're going to be making from this point forward is minimal compared to what the progress they've already continued to make from all their training. So we really emphasize workouts where we're at. I want them to see the structure and be a student of the sport, because if they had to train someone or when they get older and they want to do it themselves, they've got some idea what the heck's going on. So once we do that meeting and everybody's addressed, and then we break, then everybody or the ones who need to will come up to me on a one-on-one basis, and we kind of talk about um, if they need to modify their workout, what that looks like, or if they've got some nicks or some injuries, what the trainings look like, surfaces. And what I really try to do is I really try to empower our athletes, and I ask a lot of questions. I don't give a lot of answers, especially for our older kids. When they come to me, they'll kind of address what the issue is. For example, I've got somebody with a little bit of patella tendonitis, and running on a hard surface sometimes isn't great. Sometimes back-to-back days aren't great. We've got to cross train in between. And so the conversation really reflects him letting me know how he's feeling, what he's going to try to adapt. He gives me what he thinks would be best for him for the day, and then we talk about it. If we think that
Yeah.
it's going to fit into the schedule well, then we go with it. So I think what people see when they look at our calendar is they see the calendar, but that doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, right? There's little modifications for many people as we break off into groups who's doing what and doing what when, right? So once we meet with those people individually, they're getting their leg swings, doing their warm up routine, and they're off the door and they're out running. Okay.
Mhm.
So that's just the first part, though, right? You send them out and they do their thing. Then when they come back, I think it's almost more important to check in with them, not necessarily always a one-on-one basis, depending on what the day is, but oftentimes on a little one-on-one basis. Did that person with patella tendonitis make the right decisions for the day? They feel good about it, and just build and learn from there. So instead of me being a coach, I'm more of an advisor and listen to what they have to say and really give my best input to help them moving forward, but not always make the decisions for them.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because a lot of our listeners are, I would imagine, are head coaches, but also head distance coaches. So how do you differentiate the meeting that you have with all of your kids, and then maybe a simpler or a side meeting with just your distance kids? Is that a thing? If it is, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oftentimes our distance kids are the last ones to leave practice. So sometimes I don't see those kids, but if we happen to be on the track, and I'm watching and something happens that I like or don't like, or it looks like it's going well, I'm just really a supportive fan for them, right? I don't want to change the dialogue that our coach has going for them. Maybe I know what the conversations have been between the coaches and the athletes and the other event groups, but I'm really just there to be a big fan and encourage and support not only our coaches, but those athletes as well. So if I know, for example, today they're doing blocks and really emphasizing working on um, shin angle as they're coming out of the blocks. And I'm watching across the track and I can see it from a mile away. And somebody's done with practice and they're walking away. I'm like, that was awesome. Like, you got 3 steps in with great shin angle. That's way better than I've ever seen. So I'm more there to be a cheerleader with those other people in the other event groups, but still be supportive of them the best way I can be.
Yeah, sounds great. When you're talking to individual kids, what does that look like? So, you talked about like you ask open-ended questions and things like that. Um, how are you deciding what those conversations look like? Because again, as a head coach, we have a lot on our plates. Like, how are you deciding I'm going to communicate with this kid or I'm going to communicate with that kid, or prioritizing, an athlete versus a group? Like, how does that work within your world?
Well, honestly, and I'm sure uh, you can talk about this as well, but you develop those relationships with kids, and every single kid has to check out before they leave every day. So if I don't get them immediately after the workout, they have those moments where they can talk to me. And our older athletes or more experienced athletes really do a great job of laying the foundation of what those conversations look like. I've said to specific athletes, we need to have this conversation where other people can hear it so that they understand how to communicate with coaches and how to take that accountability, right? It's not me always telling you. And I think when people come into our program, if they don't know anything about it, they want me to spoon feed them all the information. And that's just not how we do it. And I
Mhm.
think that our older athletes do a very good job of modeling what those conversations look like. So, for example, if we get done with a workout, we get done with a race, one of the first things I will say is how to go, right? Just very simple. And it's almost a stock conversation with every single athlete as it starts, just to break the ice with it, right?
Sure.
I'm sure uh, you could probably say the same thing. As the beginning of the conversation for most is going to relatively resemble what everybody else's is, and then where it develops are their feedback, what their feedback looks like changes the dynamic. Like, for example,
Mhm.
for you, right? You guys just ran phenomenal at Oregon Relays. What the post race conversation at DMR look like?
Um, Lots of excitement. Me asking one of our soccer kids who came out this year as a senior, was it worth it? Yeah, I mean, a lot of excitement. And honestly, like tactically, there are some things we can clean up for sure. And that wasn't necessarily the time to have that conversation. Um, but a day later, we did. A day later, I talked to my anchor, and the awesome thing about her is like she recognized it before I said it. And what I was going to say was exactly what she said. Um, but
So
yeah,
how did you
in
start
that
that
regard.
conversation? How did you start that conversation to make that adjustment?
Um, so I a lot of times will ask, the way that I ask is, so what'd you think? And then a kid will kind of go into how they felt about it. And I said, like, Ellery, that was awesome yesterday. What'd you think? And she started going into, I'm really proud. I've never gone to that place before. Like I was hurting 800 in. Um, I think I could have done this and this. And we talked about what those things are. And I was like, I 100% agree. Like tactically, like there, we left some things to be desired. But I'm really proud of the fact that you did XYZ. And in this case, it was like she went by the anchor of the other team that we're competing against, and she probably should have just sat and let that girl do everything. But there's no guarantee that we run that fast. If Ellery just sits, right, that girl might slow it way down and be like, we're going to turn this into a 300-meter race. So I was really proud that Ellery, took that risk, and that's a big thing that we've been communicating with for like the last 6 weeks of like, you're running comfortably fast, but let's actually see you run fast. And she took that risk, and that was super exciting. And then even the 800 the next day, she came back and ran 210. She ran 209.75 solo last week. And the thing I said to her was, again, 100 meters ago, like she struggled. But I was really pumped about, she tried to win the race rather than trying to finish as high as she could, which I think are two very different things,
Yes.
right? You can run a little bit conservatively and run for third place or second place, or you can try to win and, it might affect you. So, but that's my big thing. And my phrase is, what'd you think? And that I think opens up the conversation similar to you were saying about, what direction are we going to go in and getting a little bit of feedback right away from the kids.
Yeah. I think it's super important, and you mentioned this is to initially be supportive, right? Because
Mhm.
ideally, what they're doing is just trial and error, and
Right.
you want to make sure that they are comfortable making that error if there's an error there. And so, if you can give them comfort or a safe place to be through verbalizing that to you, you can really
Right.
make adjustments. But if they come over and the first thing you say is that was terrible,
Yeah.
or what were you thinking? Now you can say what you were thinking, but in a positive light, right? But
Right.
that's not the direction we're talking. If you don't do that, it's going to be more difficult for you to have those conversations, honest, open conversations with your kids.
Right. And I think, I listened to Dan Iverson in person talking at a clinic, and he talked about where he stands at the Illinois State meet. And part of why he does that is because he gives himself enough time to think about what he's going to say. So to your point of if they run bad, like his thing is like, if I have 5 minutes to walk to these girls or whatever that number might be, like I can be super hot and super disappointed. But then I give myself some time to think about like, what am I actually going to say? Because I think one of the worst things we can say to our athletes, and I've heard coaches say this, is what happened, right? And as soon as a kid hears that, their initial thought is like, I messed up. That was awful. It's
They're
all
shut
these really
down.
negative thoughts. Right.
Yeah,
And I don't know that they're going to necessarily learn anything from that. Versus what'd you think? Or how do you feel about that? And that is a more inviting conversation. But I really like that. And even with my kids now, like I try to walk over slowly. If we do something pretty awesome, sometimes I can't control my excitement, but I try to like allow myself the time to think about what I want to say, just to make sure that you're not damaging that kid's confidence or damaging your relationship with them just because they ran bad.
absolutely. It's funny because um, you mentioned where Dan stands, and I think of the coaches who stand there, and a lot of the post race stuff that I've learned is from Alex Lyons and other people, just how to word things correctly. And when Alex was in Illinois, we all stood in the same spots, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just funny. It's not something that you think about, but Dan's right. If you got to walk up from the bottom of the hill, you have that time to reflect, shed a tear,
Yeah.
clean yourself up, whatever that might be, so you can be composed at those moments when you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important. And because your kids are looking for, at the end of the day, like they're looking for our approval. And not that it necessarily should be that, but in a lot of ways they are because you've built this relationship with them. I just think that like you got to be really careful post race. If things don't go the way you want them to. And sometimes there is, I had a conversation with a kid a couple weeks ago who like I felt like wasn't listening. And I told him like, I'm not going to have this conversation with you if you're just going to keep fighting me. And sometimes, as a coach or somebody who's been a part of this for a long time, I'm not saying like don't have tough conversations, don't be willing to take a stance, but it's just like, allow the kid to get there themselves,
Yeah.
I think is really important.
Yeah, so we just raced at Palatine distance night. We had two individuals go, our top female and top male. Our top female went, and it was a little windy and cold, and she ran okay. She didn't run her best race, but she was a little disappointed when she walked off the line after she finished. And when she got to me, I was smiling and kind of chuckling a little bit, and I just said, "You want to talk about it?" And by the time we walked to the other end of the track, we were both laughing,
Yeah.
and it was over. Right? There's so many positive things. One race doesn't mean our
Right.
fitness disappeared. Right? You went after it, you tried, and it didn't go exactly as you planned. Who cares? Right?
Right.
The training is there. You're healthy, and I think that having that immediate conversation and not letting negative things continue to impede the brain, as long as you have a relationship with that kid, you can do that.
Right.
This is a young lady when she was in 8th grade and didn't even know me as a coach, would collapse after the finish line. And I coached them in the postseason because Illinois coaches are not allowed to. And she fell down, and I went over and grabbed both of her hands and picked her up. And I said, "That's awesome." And she was limp as a noodle, and I just laughed at her. And that's just been our
Yeah.
relationship ever since. Whether it goes well or it goes poorly, we can smile about it because we know there's a lot more there than just running.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Um, and it's awesome to be able to build those relationships with those kids and create those things. Like, Kira, one of our top girls, she's very similar. And she just like falls to the ground. And we have this running joke that she always falls to the left rather than to the right. And then, she'll like, it'll happen. It happened after the 4x8. She ran at a tremendous leg, like ran the 2 mile. 2 hours later, came back and ran a DMR. The next day, she anchors the 4x8 in 2:17 to help us win. She goes to the ground. I'm like, God, you're being dramatic. But it's just like a running joke between us, right? Like some person next to me hears that and is like, wow, that guy's kind of rude. But she just like laughs because we have that relationship.
Yes.
And we talk about relationships with kids all the time, but that's such an important piece of it so that, kids feel comfortable. Like if we are going to present negative feedback or we are going to present some type of constructive criticism, that it's taken the right way because they know where it's coming from. And to your point about with I'm assuming it's Savannah,
Yep.
the mile, like there's always good things that we can take out of those experiences. And I try to remind myself of that. And sometimes the kids get on my case about it. And I'm like, I'm not going to allow you to just walk away and be like, that sucked. I suck, whatever. Like, I'm going to find things that I think you did really well and talk about that. And sometimes kids will come back and be like, Coach, I just need you to be harder on me right now. Like, I don't need to know that I, ran this stretch from 600 to 900 really well. I don't need that. But I always do try to come back to a positive place of like, you did this well, so that it's not everything that happened there was a disaster.
And that is created by the relationships that you've built through all the other things that you're doing.
Right. And it all stems from that.
So let me ask you this, right? Okay, so let's look at a fresh week. Do you talk about or reflect upon what has happened? I mean, what are you guys going to talk about at practice today? Are you going to talk about where you were at? Or are you going to talk about where you're going? What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, good question. A little bit of both. So like I'm going to go to yesterday because that was kind of the start of the week. So we highlighted Oregon Relays and we highlighted the other invitational Bets Tech invite that we had some of our JV kids go to. And a big part of that, a big reason for that was because it's important to highlight what those kids did, but I also try to tell stories about what those kids did. So like we have a kid, who I talked about after a meet a couple weeks ago who ran really well. And I talked about like, he's been running X amount of miles since December. And he's a guy who said, I want to do this. What do I have to do to get there? And I told his story of like what he's been doing and how he's been training and doing the little things with, sleeping and hydrating and getting to the weight room and all that stuff. Because I want our kids to see like anybody can do this if you just make the effort to do it.
Yep.
And I'll highlight our kids. And one, that gives them a big boost. Their friends are super pumped for them. But, a little freshman who's never done this before hears that story is like, I want to be that person. I can be that person. And I think, it can change them. So we will highlight that. But we're always looking towards the future. And a big thing I say all the time, and I talk about this a lot, is like, don't ever settle. Like, do not settle. We had an amazing Oregon Relays, right? Like nearly every kid who competed, I would say, had an A day or an A+ day.
That doesn't happen very often.
Right. I mean, it was wild. But if we look at that as the pinnacle of our season, districts and state will not obviously go the way that we want. So we could be really proud and really excited, but we know that we have another month of really tough workouts, another month of really tough expectations, really tough races, all that kind of stuff that we got to show up for. And I highlight that on a really consistent basis. Like I want our kids to know, like, it doesn't get easier just because we had a really great race or a really great meet. In fact, it gets harder. And I want them to be prepared for that.
Yep.
So yeah, but I do think, it's important to have those types of conversations. So let's kind of move or pivot to a different direction. Because I'm assuming this is part of what Thor wanted to know, but I also think other people would want to know when you're dressing your kids from a workout perspective, right? So you're doing a workout on the track today. You have your 15 or 30 or however many distance runners in front of you. How are you doing that? Are you just reading your group of names like you guys are doing this, you guys are doing that? Are you giving specifics about the workout, why you're doing the workout? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to the preparation for the week. For example, we have a meet with a lot of our JV kids today, and I won't be there for their workout, for the varsity kids workout. But what we've done is we've put them in a position where we know what we're trying to achieve for the workout. So whatever the reps and sets and rest interval and speed is on the sheet doesn't matter as much. right? They're going to execute that, but they know why they're trying to do the workout that they're doing today. We did long run yesterday and we are stacking it with a speed workout today. We have the ability to do that because we know that Friday for us is 30-mile-an-hour wind with thunderstorms. So
Right.
Friday's meet may not happen. But if I wait until Wednesday to do the workout and something changes where we potentially race on Thursday or something happens on Saturday, I'm stuck. So we know what the purpose of today with the long run of yesterday is before they even look at the clipboard. Most of them don't know what they're supposed to run, but on that piece of paper, it will have everything they need and they'll know how to execute it because they know what the purpose of the day is. Not necessarily just 45 seconds for 300 meters today,
Right.
that it goes way beyond that. And I think that helps them because they can make adjustments for workouts, even if I'm not there, knowing what needs to happen. Okay, I can't achieve this. It's time to pull the plug, right? It doesn't happen very often, but they are educated enough, hopefully at this point, that they can make those decisions that they need to.
Right.
Does that look similar for you?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll address the distance kids after I address everybody. And then when we start talking about workouts, like I'll give them a rundown of like, all right, so this is what we're doing today. We're doing case at threshold with X amount of minutes in between. And then from there, we're going to put our spikes on and we're going to jump into, some faster stuff. And I'll explain like the thought process around that or what we're trying to accomplish. But I think it's important for our kids. And I recognize like, the majority of them 15 minutes after I say that are going to forget what their times are, or forget like how many 200s are coming up after. But I do think that there's value in letting them know like what we're going to do and what we're hoping to accomplish. Because little by little, they do pick up more. And it's gotten to the point now where we'll do a workout. And I'll tell the kids, all right, we're doing, 4x800 at tempo. I don't say tempo is, 6-minute pace, but they just know
Yeah.
because I've said it enough times at that point. So, I try to give less as the season goes on, because I want them to take ownership of what that is and what that looks like. And they've done a good job of that, a really good job.
I would guess that most of my athletes would know what next week is going to look like with conference on Tuesday. I
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily even have to give them a workout plan. I'm pretty sure they would be able to execute pretty successfully, just knowing what we're trying to accomplish from here till the end, or even if it was the first week of the season, right?
Right.
I'm confident that they would have some idea. Now they may not know exactly if it's Ks or 800s at threshold, but they'd have some idea. All right, well, we're going to race on Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday is going to be a workout because we're not going to race for another 7 days after that. I'm probably going to do something pretty hard, and they're right.
Right.
So they kind
And
of
that's a win for us as coaches when people realize that.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So awesome. Well, in wrapping up, we've only got a couple minutes left. Anything you want to highlight? Like, if you're going to take this out of the episode, what's it going to be? Anything in particular?
I think you got to take away that you have to have that relationship with the kid to tell them what you want to tell them.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean it has to be a perfect relationship, but that means that you need to make sure the things you are saying are in cohesion with the relationship that you have with that athlete for the
Right.
ability to say that.
Yeah.
What I say to one kid, I can say in different words to another athlete and mean the exact same thing. So I think that's most important moving forward. And our hope is that on Instagram or on X, we will maybe share some clips of what some of those conversations look like with our student athletes.
Yeah.
Words that come from us and words that come from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, I think this was awesome. I agree. I think in wrapping, I'll say like, that post-race conversation, I think is really important. Just be careful about how you address it and in the direction you're going to go in. But yeah, we're super excited to have been able to talk about another really amazing topic. Thanks to Thor Espenson for bringing it to our attention. And signing off, I'm Eric Detman with my co-host Jason Retz on the Low Stick podcast.